diligencia that was used between Igualada and Barcelona, Spain. A dedicated luggage deck is on the roof crowded with hats, swords, and bandboxes. The whole is convenient, and when all parties are seated and arranged, the accommodations are by no means unpleasant. Upon the roof, on the outside, is the Imperial, which is generally filled with 6 or 7 persons more, and a heap of luggage, which latter also occupies the basket and generally presents a pile, half as high again as the coach, which is secured by ropes and chains, tightened by a large iron windlass, which also constitutes another appendage of this moving mass. The body of carriage rests upon large thongs of leather, fastened to heavy blocks of wood, instead of springs, and through whole is drawn by 7 horses. 18. The English visitor noted the small, sturdy Norman horses running away with our cumbrous machine, at the rate of 6 or 7 miles an hour. At this speed stagecoaches could compete with canal boats, but they were rendered obsolete in Europe wherever the rail network expanded in the 19th century. Where the rail network did not reach, the diligence was not fully superseded until the arrival of the autobus. In France, between 1765 and 1780, the Turgotines, big mail coaches named for their originator, Louis XVI's economist Minister Turgot, and improved roads, where a coach could travel at full gallop across levels combined with more staging posts at shorter intervals, cut the time required to travel across the countries at times by half. 19. New Zealand. A Cobb & Co., Australia, proprietor arrived in New Zealand on the 4th of October, 1861, thus beginning Cobb & Company, New Zealand, Stagecoach Operation. United States. McLaughlin Stagecoach with Birthday Party, 1880s in Park County, Colorado. McLaughlin Stagecoach with Birthday Party, 1880s in Park County, Colorado. Beginning in the 18th century, crude wagons began to be used to carry passengers between cities and towns, first within New England by 1744, then between New York and Philadelphia by 1756. Travel time was reduced on this later run from 3 days to in 1766 with an improved coach called the Flying Machine. The first mail coaches appeared in the later 18th century carrying passengers and the mails, replacing the earlier post riders on the main roads. Coachmen carried letters, packages, and money, often transacting business or delivering messages for their customers. By 1829 Boston was the hub of 77 stagecoach lines. By 1832 there were 106. Coaches with iron or steel springs were uncomfortable and had short useful lives. 2 men in Concord, New Hampshire developed what became a popular solution. They built their first Concord stagecoach in 1827 employing long leather straps under their stagecoaches which gave a swinging motion. 20. Buffalo Soldiers Guard a Concord stagecoach, 1869 detail of leather strap suspension owner Concord stagecoach Kinnear Concord stagecoach in 1880 Tombstone to Bisbee route describing a journey he took in 1861. In his 1872 book, Roughing It, Mark Twain wrote that the Concord stage's ride was like a cradle on wheels. Around 20 years later in 1880 John Pleasant Gray recorded after traveling from Tucson to Tombstone on J.D. Kinnear's Mail and Express line that day's stage ride will always live in my memory but not for its beauty spots. Jammed like sardines on the hard seats of an old-time leather spring coach a Concord leaving Pantano, creeping much of through letting the horses walk through miles of alkali just that the wheels rolled up in thick clouds of which we received the full benefit. It is always a mystery to the passenger how many can be wedged into and on top of a stagecoach. If it had not been for the long stretches when the horses had to walk, enabling most of us to get out and foot it as a relaxation, it seems as if we could never have survived the trip. The horses were changed 3 times on the 80-mile, 130 kilometers, trip normally completed in 17 hours. 21. The stagecoach lines in the USA were operated by private companies. Their most profitable contracts were with U.S. mainland were hotly contested. Pony Express, which began operations in 1860, is often called first fast mail service from the Missouri River to the Pacific coast, but the Overland Mail Company began a twice-weekly mail service from Missouri to San Francisco in September 1858. Transcontinental stagecoaching ended with the completion of the Transcontinental Railroad in 1869. 22. Southern Africa. The railway network in South Africa was extended from Mafeking through Bechuanaland and reached Bulawayo in 1897. Prior to its arrival, a network of stagecoach routes existed. 23. Ottoman Palestine. Stagecoaches, often known by the French name diligence, a smaller model with room for 6 passengers and a bigger one for 10, drawn by 2 horses, in the city, on the plain or on a good road, or 3, on intercity and elevated roads, were the main means of public transportation in Ottoman Palestine between the middle of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century. The first stagecoaches were brought to Palestine by the German religious group known as the Templars, who operated a public transportation service between their colonies in the country as early as 1867. Stagecoach development in Palestine was greatly facilitated by the 1869 visit of Austrian Emperor Franz Joseph I. For this distinguished guest, the road between Jaffa and Jerusalem was greatly improved, making possible the passage of carriages. Stagecoaches were a great improvement over the earlier means of transport used in the country, such as riding horses, donkeys or camels, or light carts drawn by donkeys. When the stagecoach ran into a difficult ascent or mud, the passengers were required to get off and help push the carriage. The trip between Jaffa and Jerusalem by stagecoach lasted about 14 hours spread over a day and a half, including a night stop at Ba al-Wad, Shah Hargai. The trip in the opposite, downhill direction took 12 hours. The stagecoaches belonged to private owners, and the wagoners were mostly hired, although some Timest wagoner was also the owner of the wagon. The license to operate the stagecoaches was granted by the government to private individuals in the cities and to the colony committees in the early Zionist colonies. The license holders paid a special tax for this right and could employ subcontractors and hired wagons. The stagecoaches linked Jerusalem with Jaffa, Hebron and Nablus, the Zionist colonies with Jaffa, Haifa, Ithaca and Nazareth. They were also used for urban and suburban transportation in the Haifa region. The colony of Rehovot is known to have promulgated detailed regulations for stagecoach operation, soon after its foundation in 1890, which were greatly extended in 1911. Fares were fixed, ranging between 1.10 grosh for traveling to the nearby village of Wadi Hanin and 5.00 grosh for traveling from Rehovot to Jaffa. The stagecoach was required to work 6 times a week, except for the Shabbat, and to carry free of charge the mails and medicines of the Rehovot pharmacy. While railways started being constructed in Palestine in the last years of the 19th century, stagecoaches were still a major means of public transport until the outbreak of the First World War, and in peripheral areas were still used in the early years of British mandatory rule. In popular culture, stories that prominently involve a stagecoach include Winds of the Wasteland, a 1936 film starring John Wayne; Wells Fargo, a 1937 film starring Joel McCrea; Stagecoach, a 1939 film starring John Wayne; Arizona Bound, a 1941 film starring Buck Jones; Stagecoach to Denver, a 1946 film starring Alan Lane; Black Bart, a 1948 film starring Dan Duryea; A Ticket to Tomahawk, a 1950 musical comedy starring Dan Daly in which stagecoach interests try to stop establishment of rail service. Riding Shotgun, a 1954 film starring Randolph Scott. Dakota Incident, a 1956 film starring Dale Robertson. Gunsight Ridge, a 1957 film starring Joel McCrea. The Tall T, a 1957 film starring Randolph Scott. Westbound, 1959 film starring Randolph Scott. The Magnificent Seven, a 1960 film starring Yul Brynner. Stage to Thunder Rock, a 1964 film starring Barry Sullivan. Stagecoach, a 1966 film starring Bing Crosby. Hombre, a 1967 film starring Paul Newman. The Stagecoach, a 1968 comic book by Goscinny and Morris. Dusty's Trail, a 1973 television series starring Bob Denver. 5 Mile Creek, a 1983 to 1985 television series featuring Nicole Kidman. Stagecoach, a 1986 film starring Chris Christopherson. Maverick, a 1994 film starring Mel Gibson. The Hateful Eight, a 2015 film by Quentin Tarantino. Part of the plot of Dr. Doolittle's circus is set in a stagecoach, where the animal-loving Dr. Doolittle is traveling along with a female seal, disguised as a woman, whom he is helping to escape from the circus. The doctor is mistaken for a notorious highwayman, see also. Carriage. Celerity. Charabanc. Charlie Parkhurst. Coach, carriage. Cobb and Co. Cobb and Company, New Zealand. Horsebus. Horse harness. Garbage stage robbery. Mail robbery. Riding shotgun. Roman traveling carriage. Stagecoaches Act 1788. Stagecoaches Act 1790. Turnpike Road. Wagonette. Wells Fargo and Company. Wickenburg Massacre.
Good. So I will make a video about this in my language Danish. But now I will take a break. Need a break. Need something to drink. So I will stop the video.